a hip-hop poetry slam that pulls together artists and activists around the issues of global climate problems, environmental issues, and social justice issues. And that's why this event is being recorded right now for later. I now want to turn to our guest artist so that he has a full 45 minutes in order to give his presentation. Mr. SHAMAKO Noble is a co-founder of the Hip Hop Congress, which was established in 2003 in California. He is a respected hip-hop artist, as well as a political theorist and a cultural organizer. He has appeared with nationally known hip-hop artists on the stage, and he served as the cultural organizer and social justice organizer for the presidential and vice presidential candidates in 2012 of the Green Party, Jill Stein and Sherry Hunkala. He is known for a smooth, subtle, but aggressive style. The depth of his understanding of political change and social dynamics is uncanny. It's extraordinary. And so I'd like to present him now. And by the way, if you want to check out his biography, there is a brief biography, somewhat outdated, but still very interesting, on Wikipedia, and that is SHAMAKO Noble, SHAMAKO, capital NOBLA. And now I'd like to present, without further ado, Mr. SHAMAKO Noble.
So I guess first off, I want to thank everybody for being here. It's interesting because I'm a big fan of eye contact and body language. One of the really sort of interesting things about the moment we're in historically, politically, is sort of questions around culture and media. And, you know, one thing that I want to anchor as we head into this conversation is that we live in a country that doesn't have a cultural policy. In fact, in many ways, the importance of that truth is just kind of coming to the forefront of a certain section of political consciousness, when on the other hand, it's been present for many other sections of the population for as long as they've been, you know, kind of in this conversation. And I think it's really significant when we talk about something like the Global Climate Convergence and Earth Day to May Day. And there's a lot of different ways that you can go with this. But one thing I think that, so taking a step back, when I talked to Elena about this yesterday, one of the things we discussed was that HipHop Congress is, you know, currently an endorser and supporter of the Global Climate Convergence. And we are going to be participating in an event at the end of college on April 30th. And that event is going to be in partnership with another group called Silicon Valley Debug. I'm going to talk a little bit more about them later, but I'm going to recommend that for any of you that are taking notes, please write that down, Silicon Valley Debug, and Christian Homeless Alliance Ministry, SHAM, and another group on campus at the end of college known as 4 Elements. And they're a student organization that's based in hip-hop. And we are also talking to some folks in the labor movement about organizing artists around May 1st, sort of the repositioning of May 1st as the real Labor Day in 2016. And, you know, part of the reason I say that you can take this conversation in a lot of different directions is because, you know, looking at something like Earth Day to May Day, it's kind of loaded, right? Because, I mean, just on the surface of it, you have, for instance, the sort of historical perceptions or misperceptions about both what the environmental movement is and what the labor movement is. And so I think it's significant that what this motion represents to a certain extent is the consistent and continued effort to de-silo, right, or to de-isolate sections of the movement in a moment of transition and crisis. And that is not going to come without some challenges, right? Because when we haven't had to work with each other, we don't have to deal with the fact that we don't know how to work with each other. And so we're entering a time where we're having to work with each other, and we're actually having to look at the situation as a whole, ourselves, our differences, our similarities, and we're having to struggle at a level in which, you know, we could generally avoid in different periods. And, you know, one really important thing here is sort of the, I guess, lack of, you might use the phrase class consciousness, you might use the phrase humanity, just our ability to see each other in each other. But, you know, historically speaking, I mean, in this moment right now, there's people on the internet, and you can find all types of negative imagery about the climate justice environmental movement, right? I mean, we all have heard the phrase tree hugger. And, you know, in the appropriate environment, it can even be worth a chuckle or two. But really what it underscores is almost like a hostility for concern for the environment. But, or I should say but, and there have also been real and valid criticisms about the environmental movement's struggle to honor, respect, fuse with, work with, you know, folks in other movements, right? And I think if we look at, for instance, labor, and let me take a step back, because when I say labor, I want to make a distinction between the labor movement, which is really all working people, versus unions, which is a highly organized section of the labor movement. There are additional organized or less organized or less identified sections of labor as well. So I'm making a distinction both for myself as we move forward and for our collective conversation. But, you know, when we look at unions, for instance, certainly they have come under grave attack in the last, 20 to 30 years, but really in a focused manner in the last 5 to 10. I think we've seen that reflected in states like Wisconsin. I think we've seen that reflected in Illinois and Michigan. I think we've seen that reflected in California. I know in some of the work we were doing in the Bay Area, when the BART transportation workers were, struggling with whether or not to go on strike, there were real and concrete places of resistance from Bay Area residents who were generally, I don't know, I mean, this is where it gets tricky and the media comes in. Because if you were to read the newspapers, you would have gotten the impression that the BART workers were like the worst people in the Bay Area. And that they were just being greedy and they wanted all the money and they were willing to ruin your ability to earn your living in order to do that. Politically speaking, the Bay Area is a significant strategic location in the labor movement. One ally that we are working with went so far as to say that it is one of the 6 really strategic and important locations throughout the country that if you are interested in breaking the labor movement, this is definitely a place where you want to target. And of course, public workers, transportation workers, these are some of the strongest unions and one of the most important sections, public services, right? And so, what they represented to the movement for unions and labor as a whole was really generally in favor of the working class, and yet, when you looked at a lot of the news reports, stuff that was coming out in the Open Tribune, the San Francisco Chronicle, you would have thought that they were trying to destroy society. Now, of course, not everybody falls for that, and there's still some degree of working people solidarity, but there was a need for the union, as I understand it, internally to start to reconsider strategically their relationship to the community as a result, because they realized that, their image is getting battered out there. And so, I use those 2 examples because, when you look at something like Earth Day and May Day, we can look at that as a reflection of 2 different movements coming together, right? A workers' movement and an environmentalism movement. And we can also look at the reality that in a lot of mainstream media, neither of these movements are really held up as being in our general interest as a society, as a planet, as a species. And yet, we know that the facts and that history generally leans towards that formulation as the truth, right? We can debate certain things, but if we're debating and we're using like rules of logic and evidence, you have a hard time arguing that polluting and pillaging the planet is a good long-term strategy for anyone other than a really, really greedy, kind of disconnected, possibly sociopathic capitalist. No judgment. Now, I want to bring this around to artists because I was brought into this conversation as an artist, and I'm going to I'm going to do a couple of pieces before we get out of this conversation. But I wanted to start with the climate convergence and the sort of reality that, one, this is a very significant moment. That two, right now, our public media infrastructure, the mainstream public media infrastructure, and as a result, the sort of public culture and conversation around these things is actually contrary to its real nature, right? Meaning the public conversation does not honor the importance and relevance of this work, right? So coming back to artists, and I'm a hip-hop artist, right? I'm a rapper. So one thing I want to say is, like, what am I even doing on this call, right? Or how did hip-hop even get into this conversation? And that's a complicated question that requires some degree of understanding of not just the history of hip-hop, but the history of culture in America and in capitalist society. And, you know, I mean, we could say white patriarchal capitalist society, and I mean, we could keep adding things to those, but for this particular conversation, I want to focus on that element because to a certain extent, our understanding of the importance of that element and the role that it plays in some of these conversations, or lack thereof, also speaks to how we allow ourselves to get so easily divided by some of these other groupings. But, you know, I'll start by saying one project we're working on in Hip Hop Congress is a project called What the Bleep Happened to Hip Hop. And what the Bleep Happened to Hip Hop is, it's a discussion, right? It's a series of dialogues and collective community conversations about, you know, how hip hop emerged, what are its uses, like what are its practical and its practical, economic, political, social uses in today's society, and how do we strategize and collectivize our actions at local, regional, national, and international levels to take some control of our collective cultural destiny. And you know, one thing we know is that we don't expect to have all the answers. We don't expect everybody's answers to be the same or for everyone to agree about those answers. But what we do expect is for the conversation to be important, because so often we go through these situations without really critically thinking about, I shouldn't even say that, without discussing with others how we're really seeing or perceiving or experiencing these things. And so we've only done like a couple of these, but one of the things that we've sort of gotten right off the bat is, I didn't even know anybody else was thinking about this, right? So I had this really great talk with Marielena yesterday, just in preparation for this thing. And, you know, she was talking about, you know, we have a lot of these young artists and, you know, they want to be involved and engaged with these things, but they're working 2 or 3 jobs to make ends meet, you know. And they know that if they come with certain types of content, they will not be, they're not as likely to be successful in the music industry with that content as with other content. You know, cars and clothes and women and all that other stuff, right? And you know, so they're gonna, and you know, there's a truth to that, and it's complex, right? Like I was having a conversation with one of our members here in Detroit yesterday, because sort of one of the things that they mentioned was, you know, in their experience with Columbia Records, you know, when they were meeting with executives, it wasn't just a bunch of crotchety old white men, right? It was people of color. It was women. It was members of the LGBT community. And they were as equally complicit in pushing some of these images as anyone else was, right? And again, I think that this is part of where, like, a class analysis becomes really important. But, you know, the bottom line is that there really is no clear pathway for the production, distribution, and exchange of healthy culture in the current system we have, at least in relationship to hip hop, right? So, you know, when somebody like Macklemore comes out, I don't know how many people here know who Macklemore is, but if you don't know who he is, feel free to Google him. It's Macklemore, M-A-C-K-L-E-M-O-R-E. He did that song, Thrift Shop. So when Macklemore comes out, and he gets an award at the MTV Music Awards for being like a socially conscious artist, it really betrays the fact that there are literally thousands of socially conscious artists, at least hundreds of which are as good or better than Macklemore. It was the impression that Macklemore had some sort of particular savvy business-wise that makes him more worthy as an artist than all of the other artists who may be working as hard, put in as much effort, and just made different choices or had different access to different things for any number of reasons. And I lived in Seattle for 2 years. I met Macklemore in 2006, 2007. I did a workshop with him or something. And I personally, he's a good guy. Like, I don't have any. He's not a bad person. I'm not claiming he's a bad person or he's anything. But I also know a lot of the local artists that he came up with. And, some of them grind just as hard. Made all of the correct moves that they were supposed to make. And, there's just something to be said for what is perceived as supply and demand. A lot of our work as Hip-Hop Congress over the last 10, 15 years or so has really been about educating people about what hip-hop actually is and how it really shows up in real life, and how it can be used at local, regional, national, and international levels that are not strictly industry-oriented. But there's a challenge here, because even, it's really ironic, right? Because people in the movement know that the mainstream media is not on their side. And yet, just in the need to draw masses when it comes to cultural production, art, music, etc., even the movement can still default to the default because that's what we think we're supposed to do. So even though we know, for instance, our local newspaper may be attacking our movement, we take that same newspaper's word about hip-hop seriously as a movement. We don't view that information with the same critical eye, because there's some underlying assumptions in that we may not have challenged ourselves on, whether we believe them or we don't believe them. And so, I say all this to say that, again, if you look at sort of my original, formulation around Earth Day and May Day, and the climate movement meeting, unions and the labor movement, and the critical significance of both of these movements, and the fact that A, they don't historically get along well with each other. B, the general press and conversation around them in the mainstream media is not in their favor. And that C, that conversation in the mainstream press that is not in their favor is actually contrary to our collective interest, right? That applies just as well for cultural producers, and in particular, it applies especially for hip-hop artists. And this is where it gets kind of tricky. Because, as we know, culture and media are tools. We'll even go so far as to call them weapons in the battle and struggle for the hearts, minds, and souls of the people. Right? It is the property of the spirit. And when we talk about America's lack of a cultural policy, one of the things that we're really addressing is the necessary historical stripping or separation of multiple peoples, right? Indigenous peoples, various groups. The historical stripping or separating of them from their history, from their language, from their spiritual structure, from their culture, from their humanity. I was, literally just with a friend of mine who runs the Multicultural Center here at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor, and he's currently working on his dissertation. And his dissertation is really about how when you understand what hip hop is, and you weigh it against sort of the history of culture in humanity, what you find is that hip-hop is really just a modern-day indigenous art form. Even though we see it in the world with music videos and turntables and all these things, it really actually doesn't really require a lot of technology to be produced. It can be made with just the human body. I'll tell a story. When I was 17, I was in San Diego for an event that was called the B-Boy Summit. It's ironically thrown by a woman named Asia One. And the B-Boy Summit was a huge gathering that brought together thousands of hip-hop cats from all over the planet. And, it was so large this year that none of the venues that they had booked actually allowed for the amount of people that showed up at them. I'm getting a little echo over here, but I wanted to check in. You guys hear me okay? Everybody hear me okay?
We're hearing okay.
Yes, we're doing very well here.
Okay, great. Basically, it was a Saturday night, and what that left you with was, thousands of creative people who don't normally live in San Diego just wandering the streets. And, I was with two of my friends, and we ran into a group of folks having a cipher. So, some of you in this room might know what a cipher is, some might not, so I'll tell you. A cipher is basically two or more people sort of exchanging raps or flows in like a cyclical fashion. Usually it's freestyle. Sometimes it'll be stuff that's already written. But we ran into the cipher. It was like 4 or 5 people. We were 3 people, so that made 7 or 8. And as we sat there, it continued to grow, right? So it went from 8 people, 2 other people walked up, it became 10. 4 other people walked up, it became 14. And at one point, you have 17 people just sort of sitting in this area of the street. We don't have any radios or microphones or sound systems. There's just somebody beatboxing and cats being creative, spontaneously creative. And so the police, they walked up to us and they were like, "We need you to move because you're obstructing the sidewalk." I don't think we got any complaints from the people themselves, but that was pretty much how the police chose to approach it. So, at any rate, I did not think we were done. So, we had a conversation amongst us, and somebody was like, I know where there's a parking lot around the corner, let's head to this parking lot. So, we decided to head to this parking lot. And so as we were walking, right, there's like people seeing this group of people walk. And remember, there's thousands of us just wandering the streets this evening, right? So we leave this spot 15 people, we get to the parking lot 30, right? So we've now gone from like this original 5 people that we joined to 30 people. And we're sitting in this parking lot having this huge cipher. And this is 1997, so nobody's got pagers, nobody's got cell phones, there's no way that this is communicated other than just through like the energy of the environment. And somehow we end up going from like 30 people to 50 people, and from like 50 people to 80 people. And before we know it, this parking lot has literally become like a public festival. And there's like 2 or 3 ciphers going on, like you got break dancers in a circle, and again, there's no radio, they're just clapping. And like they're in a dance, we're exchanging the human spirit just because we can. And it was all rough. Like there was no violence, there's no conflict, there was no hard drugs or alcohol. It was just humans being humans. And so of course there was a downfall, right? And so basically what happened was there was a cat from this group that was called Hobo Junction. It's an underground group from the Bay Area. And this guy we saw him jogging, he was jogging
He had his tapes, his box of tapes in his hand. And, you know, there were two cops sort of lightly in pursuit of him as he jogged. And he was like, "You are now witnessing the demise of the black man," which we thought was funny, but the cops did not. So he got rushed. You know, there's a crowd of like 100 people around, so, you know, 10 or 15 of them kind of start closing in around the police. They bust out the mace, people are getting maced now. Before we know it, there's motorcycle cops downtown, helicopters, pandemonium, people running everywhere. And for the most part, as we understand it, everybody got away safe except for that guy. He got arrested that night. But here's the overall moral of the story. The first moral is that we were able to create a public event, a celebration with nothing but space and people, and there was nothing else necessary. The second piece is that for some reason that was deemed some kind of threat to private property, and it was necessary to have helicopters. I mean, it's one thing to have a couple of police officers. It's a whole other thing when you brought the chopper downtown to spotlight people distant. But when you really start to look at these things from a historical perspective, when you're trying to destroy people's spirit, it is important to strip them of the knowledge of who they actually are and how much power they have. And one of the things that hip-hop presented was a culture that sprang out of the heart of exploitation and literally required none of what that society offered to exist. And you can't just leave something like that alone. You have to take that. And so just on a cultural level, if you really look at, you go back in the annals and you sort of study how hip-hop evolved from, say, 1975 to 1997, prior to the death of Tupac and Biggie. It was a genuinely healthy formulation. And I say healthy, what I mean is, it asked good questions. It made good suggestions. It said things like ladies first, and be a father of your child, and fight the power, and fuck the police. And it said all of these things in context, in a context. And, you know, people often complain about the negative content of gangster rap, but in a lot of ways, gangster rap was helpful and responsible to a certain extent for forcing America to remember things it consistently tries to forget. When NWA came out with Fuck the Police, I mean, we have to remember that this was at a time when in LA, the flooding of certain neighborhoods was cracked, the proliferation of gangs who came out of self-defense in Los Angeles, where they used to literally recruit police officers from the South because of their racist nature. Okay? This is where gangs started. It wasn't just a group of black people who decided to take over a block. It was young men and women creating formulations of defense because they were under attack both from, you know, some people in their community as well as law enforcement during the 60s and the 70s. And, you know, the Bloods and the Crips came out of that process. But in some ways, so did the Los Angeles Black Panthers. A lot of people don't know this, but the Los Angeles Black Panthers was actually originally a gang. It was called the Swanson Gang. And, you know, Huey Newton and Bobby Seale basically made some, you know, direct recruitment pitches to some of the leaders of those gangs. But those gangs came out of a self-defense ethic, not a criminal or entrepreneurial one. And if you don't have these pieces of history and understand the evolution of these things, if you just take them in pieces, then you won't understand what you're actually looking at. And this is important because what it means is you can be tricked into thinking that your ally is actually your enemy. And so in many ways, the current understanding of the significance of hip hop and its contribution and potential contribution to the movement is based in a misshapen public conversation that is no different than what is happening to the climate movement, than what is happening to the union and labor movement, and what is happening to the immigrant movement.
Lead off with the first question.
Yes.
First of all, I wanted to ask Mr. SHAMAKO Noble to reiterate the key websites that, especially not only the Global Climate Convergence website, but also his own. And if he would, and then later on, I will reserve my other questions until after audience members have had a chance to ask theirs. Keep in mind that we are now down to essentially 20 points, but I would like 20 minutes, but I would like to wrap up if possible in 12 minutes or 15 minutes, so that Mr. Noble has at least 5 minutes to wrap up. So if you would please reiterate your. I will mention for those who are here right now, there are two key websites involving the sponsors of this event. The first one is the Harris County Green Party.org. That is one of the key sponsors of the event. That website is www.harriscountygreenparty.org. The second major website is the Global Convergence, the Global Climate Convergence website that called nationally for these events to take place between Mother Earth Day and May Day. And that website is www.globalclimateconvergence.org. You can find the national calendar on that website and the local calendar of events on the Harris County Green Party website. Proceed, Mr. Noble, please, with your own website and other pertinent.
Website I want to give is www.HipHop-Congress.com. And obviously that's HipHop-Congress's website. We're in the process of a redesign, so if you go there now, you'll see a t-shirt ad. We just finished a t-shirt fundraiser, but just checking it out because we're going to be launching with some new content soon, so that should be pretty exciting. Second, Silicon Valley Debug, so that's Silicon Valley DEBUG.com. It's an organization that I work with in the Bay Area. It's definitely where I do a lot of my writing, publishing, and also they are a group that has a lot of that does a lot of work, particularly around culture, criminal justice, immigration, and environmental justice, and sort of the intersection of those things. So definitely check that out.
Please repeat that.
The Women's Economic Agenda Project. So WEAP, that's WEAP.org. So I definitely want to recommend that. And then Green Shadow Cabinet, there's a greenshadowcabinet.com. I think it's .com, it might be .net. So I don't know. It's one of those two. So I'll stop there, open up to any other questions.
Would you please repeat the first website that you gave?
Yeah, that is Hip Hop Congress.
No, the second one.
Oh, Debug? So that's Silicon Valley Debug.
How do you spell that?
SILICON. Silicon. Valley, VALLEY. Debug, DEBUG.com.
DEVUG.
DEBUG.
B as in Victor. B as in boy.
No. B as in boy.
SHAMAKO, thanks for joining us today. We apologize that some of us had to set this up rather quickly, and so we're looking forward perhaps to returning perhaps next year and doing this more thoroughly. For example, we could have a video conference using a computer such as mine. I got a MacBook Pro and it's got FaceTime and all that stuff on it. And that way you can be doing the body language as well as the vocal. So, yes, there are trends planet-wide going on right now. The grassroots people are setting up cooperatives, decentralized, sustainable self-sufficiency in opposition to the capitalist courtocracy, with its bribery of the politicians. So, the big money seems to be controlling all the politics and leadership of the world, and that's just outright bribery. So, towards that ends, here with the Green Party in Houston, we have a number of things going on. We have candidates all over the state trying to break the power of the duopoly. But if you've got a pencil handy, you may take a look at lunarsolarpower.org, and this is a energy solution. Another thing that has to do with decentralization and self-sufficiency and energy and democracy and a whole lot of things is look at Phoenix Project Foundation.us, as in USA, and then finally Democracy Amendment USA.net. And that's some very good things for study and sharing with you. And we hope that you may be able to rejoin us next year with a much bigger event and really hear some of that poetry and enjoy it with everyone. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Appreciate you.
Questions?
Do we have another question? We have two questions. Will Nancy Saibara please come to the mic? Nancy, by the way, is one of the heroes in helping put together this event.
How is the independent media surviving over there in California?
That is an interesting question. Well, I'll tell you this much. There is a lot of transition and tumultuous activity. And there's a lot of, there's always new things emerging, right? But I don't know if anybody heard, KPFA, their executive director was removed, and she's been occupying KPFA, occupying it, living there for the last month. So, you still have people like Davey D and, a lot of those other folks still producing their stories and doing their thing. A lot of institutions are in transition because situations are different. And you have a lot more independent producers that don't necessarily have the same large bases. So it's a tough call. That's a really important question. I say it's still there. And it's struggling. Just in terms of the union workers, that was, some of it is everybody's sort of learning everybody's importance differently. So it's shaping itself differently. But it's not, I couldn't tell you what it is, and I don't think you could tell you what it is because it doesn't know yet.
Okay, well, I want to encourage you to get the people's voices that are struggling on the air at KPFA or KPFK in Pacifica or any of the community radio station. I have one other question. How is the single-payer movement going on in California? I know you have it on the tables, and Vermont has passed theirs, Hawaii has passed their single-payer universal health care, Oregon has passed it, And I heard California is struggling. What's going on?
Well, okay, so again, that's an interesting political question, right? I think two things happened in California. One was Obama, and certain large sections of California that were a part of the single-payer movement. And I think there's people like you could answer much better at this question than I am, like I do. But large sections of the single-payer movement put a lot of faith in that. I mean, the same way I think they put a lot of faith in having a Democratic majority in California, which brings me to the second thing that happened, which is that Democratic majority got elected and didn't do anything. So I think that movement's kind of repositioned. I mean, I think that here in California, it was expected that we would have passed it, and that's not what happened. And so I think there's a confusion about what to do now. Because the thinking is that if you elect Democrats and they don't do it, then what do you do? But I think that, as we all know, that's one of the things that makes the Green Party an appealing option. Now, the Green Party structural capability to take that movement energy and turn it into some successful initiative, working on it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a follow-up question on that theme, and then we'll have someone who raised their hand ask a new question on a new theme. The follow-up question is, what other independent media has been open and accessible by hip-hop artists such as yourself, who have a very keen, let's say, awareness of political and social events? I know that you've published, I believe, a number of articles in an independent a press that is online called peoplestribune.org. What other kinds of independent media? I believe also you appeared on KPFA, which is one of the 5 Pacifica radio stations in California. So what other independent media has been accessible by hip-hop artists?
Okay, great question. So, one, college radio. College radio is really big for independent hip-hop artists. And in the Bay Area, hip-hop was pretty instrumental in unifying the college radio movement at that time. And in the Bay, we had Stanford, UC Berkeley, Cal State Hayward, San Jose State, Santa Clara University, that all have radio shows. And San Francisco State. That has historically been like a staple for independent artists. Yes, I want to echo the People's Tribune. Hip-Hop Congress has had a partnership with the People's Tribune for many years now. In fact, we have an article in there this month covering an interview with one of our board members, Alfonso Mayfield, who was both one of the instrumental sort of beginning leaders of Congress and is also the president of the Florida Public Service Workers Union, in the middle of a lot of struggles taking place there in the South. I mentioned Debug. Debug's actually been hugely supportive of independent artists and cultural workers, particularly ones with political and social perspectives. And, one of the things that's important to note about Debug is that it's connected to the New American Media Network and a lot of different ethnic media networks, and communicating to particular populations in very specific ways that they can connect to. So that's been very key. All of the KPFs, right? KPFA, KPFK, Kimberly King, The Beautiful Struggle in Los Angeles. She's been very supportive in the past. We've had some great relationships with their show. Public access television. We've had a lot of success with developing relationships with local cable channels and TV shows. We run music videos, we do interviews. It's been something we've been doing for 10 or 15 years. So that's been huge. Blogs. A lot of people have blogs.
There's a huge network of hip-hop blogs, independent political blogs, not just blogs that are the Huffington Post, but, I mean, you know, that's an option too. But we've definitely been working to utilize blogs as well. Yeah, I mean, generating our own media, you know, creating our own blog. And I mean, one thing that we have is a network of relationships with some of these, you know, sources, so that when we produce an article, it goes through, you know, channels of 5 to 10 different organizations. You may have to rewrite it 2 or 3 times, but the great thing is that we get a spread on a diversity of communication via different levels of local and independent media. So that.
Finally, we have about
2 minutes.
Okay, the person who had a question has waived their need to ask it. So now we have 2 minutes for you to sum up, SHAMAKO Noble, and if you will, and before you do, again, I just want to extend a hearty thanks from a lot of people who will hear this because of the generous offer by our production, well, I should say our producer, and who's outstanding as a media activist and as an artist, and that is Mr. Ernesto Leon. Is there any word from Ernesto Leon with regard to this presentation? I would like him to say a word. He's known throughout, internationally, in fact, as a television producer as well and radio producer. But he is principally a media activist and artist. Mr. Leon.
Well, thank you for everyone being here. I have 2 very simple questions. What do you think about the media covered the Ukraine in Venezuela issues? And finally, I would like to ask for a message for the young people about the environment issues. These are my 3 questions. Thank you.
I'm gonna take the second one first. Yeah, I mean, the American media lies all the time, and I don't know the exact. I don't know what the exact sequence of lying is. Like if there's like an order from on high where somebody says this is the story, or if it's just somehow it's structured not to filter information correctly, or if there's several, you know, mixes of that. But I mean, there's grains of truth. Here's what I know. I know that I have no idea what's really going on outside of my understanding of America historically.
We have 2 minutes. We have only 2 minutes.
And you know, generally speaking, so, you know, nothing's perfect. I don't think that's an excuse for not seeking justice and balance and health, but, you know, when somebody has certain critiques about a country, I'm sure that they're valid and whatnot. I'm sure that there's certain critiques about Venezuela that are valid. You know, 9 times out of 10 in history, our government isn't necessarily on the right side of this. I'm not confident they are this time. I haven't talked to any of the people of Venezuela directly, so I don't know. If history is any teller, pretty much the opposite of what is normally discussed in the mainstream media is like more like the truth. And Ukraine is a similar situation. I mean, you know, I think with Putin, not to make it like an individualism thing, but, you know, he's got an interesting way of approaching stuff. Like, I'm going to hang out with bikers and fish and show you my jiu-jitsu moves or whatever. And I mean, that doesn't speak to like the interests of the people who control both Russia and America, like really. But I mean, just whatever's going on in that situation, it is not really a global threat to any of the people of either country. It's some fight they're having that they want to drag the rest of the planet into. And I don't know, that's kind of subjective. But you know, there's no evidence that anything going on there has anything to do with anything. So, you know, I watch these reports and I'm like, what the hell are you guys talking about? Hey, there's so many other things we can all acknowledge are considerably more urgent, present, important, valid, easy to prove. But our situation's mucky though. It's so mucky that the truth seems crazy and the insane is what we discuss on a regular basis.
One last question. Would you be able to share your email address with folks that are taking part in this event?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really simple. SHAMAKO, it's SHAMAKO, Noble, NOBLE, music, MUSIC, @gmail.com.
Thank you very much. Again,
Thank you.
You've been most generous with your time, your experience, your insights, and most importantly, with your reaching out and doing, not just talking about it with hip-hop as an art form, but actually serving as a cultural organizer as well as a political theorist. Thank you so much for what you do.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I look forward to next year.
Oh, great.